Hello, Petal. How you doing? How you getting on? How are things? Please let me know in the comments or send me an email. Drop me a line. Let me know how you're all doing. Happy New Year. I'm sorry I'm a bit late getting back to the swing of things, but best laid plans of mice and men and all that jazz. So, full transparency, as you know, I had one of my cats was unwell with a tumour on the side of his head, and we did have to say goodbye to him on New Year's Eve. So I want to be genuine with you, and when I come down to it, I want to just bring you the joy and the cheeriness and be all positive and everything, but I just could not bring myself to record for that period. I'm still a bit wobbly, not going to lie, which is understandable, because it's one of those situations where you know it's going to happen. You're expecting it and you're doing palliative care, but it's still not fair. You know what I mean? It was still really bright and cheery and, but it was just to the point where it was just too dangerous to try and keep managing it every time he caught it. And, even the vet said they could just give us 20% chance. So, yes, but just wanted to let you know and apologise sincerely for being a bit late coming back to the party. But what we're going to do, we're going to lift ourselves up and be positive, because it's a new year and it's a continuance of the good work that we've been doing, and we're all back together, and it's lovely, lovely to be here. So I can share with you the chapter 14 of Here Comes the Sun by our wonderful beloved Mr. Thomas of Holt. As ever, if you could hit that notifications bell if you don't get notifications. I do try and do community posts now and again, so they're up on the community section if you want to see them. Might do those a bit more this year. I want to do more lives this year, and I'm also going to be doing more of my Substack as well. And that's just, I've not got any charges to join in with that one as well. So if you do use Substack and you want to take part and get involved in it, please, by all means, follow me on there, and I'll put links up in the descriptions, maybe, if I remember. Okie dokie, my lovely beans. Let's get on to chapter 14 of Here Comes the Sun. Part of staff's duties was the inspection, on a more or less regular basis, of some of the more outlying departments which had no internal review system of their own. He didn't enjoy doing it at the best of times, and complaints was perhaps his least favourite. Access to complaints is naturally open to everybody and everything in the universe, regardless of your species, metaphysical status, or temporal orientation. However, for the sake of internal administrative efficiency, the department reserves the right only to consider complaints which are submitted in the prescribed form. The prescribed form is Form C301, a 15-page booklet printed on pages of beaten gold, 12 miles long by 5 miles wide. Once completed, the form must be submitted in triplicate, and the top copy must be countersigned by an apostle, saint, minor Celtic saints excepted, archangel, bodhisattva, Taoist patriarch, daemon of grade 5 or higher, elector of the Holy Roman Empire, or other person of similar standing in the community. Narrator's note: in the last company I worked for, one of my roles, aside from being head of marketing and communications for the entire company, was to actually run the customer services department, because that was essentially part of communications. And trust me, if somebody wants to complain about their suntan, tanning bed, sunbed shop, anything like that, what they will do is they will do that off their own back. In an email carved into your forehead, screamed down the telephone, and they do it with the greatest of alacrity and fun. Yes, people who want to complain will complain, and they will do it very loudly. There's always ways and means, and trust me, you get more with honey than with bile. Right. Hello, Staff called, pushing against the door with all his weight and heaving. Anybody here? The door gave way, and Staff staggered off balance into the darkened office. He rummaged in his coat pocket for his flashlight and switched it on. This place always gave him the creeps. Now, it's not anybody that's worked in customer service, you know full well that your office, anywhere you go that is part of the customer service role, does give you the creeps, and it scars you for life. Just saying. Over here, said a voice, not very helpfully.
Where's here?
What do you mean? Where's here? Here. Staff frowned because the voice was coming from inside his head. Look, he said, I've warned you about that already. There was a muted plop and Ganga was standing beside him. I know, he said, and I'm sorry, it's just that I had to hitch a ride just to get past security. Staff nodded. Fair enough, he said. So, what was so important that it couldn't wait till... The words evaporated on his lips like rain on a blast furnace as the beam of his torch licked something huge and shiny in the far corner of the room. A part of his brain, the part where most of his thoughts refused to go, except in pairs in broad daylight, said, I know what that is. The rest of his brain pretended it had not heard. I know, Ganga said. A bit of a turn-up, really. Still, there's a first time for everything. Staff stopped dead, turned, and looked at him. You don't mean to say, he said slowly, that somebody has actually... complained. Yes, Ganga nodded. Fortunately, he said, it isn't valid. The torch beam flashed on what seemed to be an infinity of gold space, and the photons bounced and bounced and bounced. It isn't? Nope. Why not? I don't know about you, replied Ganga, but I don't think Colonel Gaddafi falls within the permitted class of counter-signatories. Apart from that, though, it's all in order and according to Hoyle. Staff scratched his chin. It's a moot point, actually, he said. Anyway, we can leave that to the boys in legal. Who's it from? That's the puzzling thing, Ganga replied, fiddling aimlessly with his keyring. Nobody seems to have heard of him. Let's go and see if the name rings any bells with you. With the help of a turbocharged golf buggy, which they found in an outhouse, they made the journey across Form C301. Eventually, after taking a wrong turning just after paragraph 65A, C4, and running out of petrol on the slopes of the embossed seal, they came to the right place. Ganga put on the handbrake and replaced his sextant in the glove compartment. Here we are, he said. Look. Staff moved his feet and saw directly under them the words Jeremy Lloyd Perkins, shallowly engraved in the soft metal. Who? Search me, Ganga replied. I tried looking him up on the computer, but of course the blasted thing was down again. I've got my secretary going through the card index right now. Staff knelt down and ran a finger over the scored marks. So what's he complaining about? He said. That's what I thought you ought to see, Ganga replied. Come on. The draftsman who designed Form C301 had so many questions of an apparently irrelevant but of course strictly necessary nature to ask that the space left on the form for the actual complaint measured 80 millimetres by 20. No, it is no. Oh, that would be bliss, wouldn't it? Anyway, I digress. Mr. Lloyd Perkins, however, was gifted with small handwriting. Ganga produced a magnifying glass and held the torch while Staff examined the tiny words. He said. Exactly, Ganga replied. It's not looking good, is it? Staff got up and brushed gold dust from his knees. I don't suppose it was her fault, though, he said. You know as well as I do that the sorting office up there is a mess. That's one of the reasons why we sent her there. Sure, Ganga replied. That's not the point, though, really, is it? It isn't? Ganga shook his head, produced a collapsible shooting stick from his coat pocket, drove its point through the thin gold membrane, and sat down. Of course not, he replied. Think about it, will you? Here's a mortal nobody's ever heard of, right? From what he says here, I gather that he's a subscriber to Oracle for the financial news. In other words, he's got a soul equipped with teletext. Narrator's note? Oh, teletext. I remember the days of CFAX and teletext being absolutely the bee's knees. It's not the same. But otherwise, he's probably just a small-timer. Okay so far? Staff nodded. So, Ganga continued, offering his colleague a peppermint. You don't suppose for 1 minute that he's in a position to know about the complaints procedure? Even if he does, nobody's going to tell me that somebody who lives on a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs of Cardiff can afford this much gold just to complain about a garbled message. No, somebody has put him up to it. Staff looked up.
One of us, you mean?
Someone in the service, certainly, Ganga replied.
With a view to implicating you and me, you reckon?
Ganga nodded. Smart move, he said. Whoever it was knew there'd have to be an inquiry, and even if she's cleared, it'll still bring the fact that she's a mortal, hard without the authority of a resolution, out into the open. Clever, no? Staff nodded, his jaws working slowly and methodically on the peppermint.
I'm not very happy about that,
he said.
Me neither. I think,
Staff continued, his brows lowering,
that counts as playing silly buggers. And no, I don't reckon we should put up with it at all.
He shook his head.
No, he went on, that won't do at all. Have you got any idea who?
Afraid not, Ganga replied, standing up and folding the stick away. I'm making discreet inquiries, of course, but that's going to take time. I guess all we can do is be on our guard and wait and see. Staff nodded.
I suppose,
he said.
Sooner or later, whoever it is will want to know why nothing's been done about the complaint. I don't suppose he knows it isn't valid.
Maybe not, Ganga replied. It could be that this is just intended as a warning, but I don't think so. It's a bit, monumental for that.
I've seen subtler hints,
Staff agreed, as the light from the torch played over the golden prairie all around them.
Oh, well, thanks for letting me know.
My pleasure, Ganga said, and grinned.
In the meantime,
he said, I suppose I'd better just get this cleared up, put on microfiche. Staff nodded.
Right,
he said,
and, what happens to the original, the hard copy, so to speak?
Ganga shrugged.
Oh,
I don't know, he said, with a slightly exaggerated carelessness.
Bin it, I suppose,
or file it away somewhere. Mustn't let the place get cluttered up with piles of redundant old forms, must we? On their way out, they were passed by a 3-mile-long column of container lorries with an escort of soldiers equipped with axes, shovels and heavy-duty gear. As the lead jeep went by, the driver raised his arm and gave Ganga a cheery wave.
Friend of yours?
Staff asked. Never seen him before in my life, Ganga replied. Keep in touch. Hey!
What?
Over here!
Oh,
Bjorn stood up, stepped over the recumbent guard, and ran swiftly across the short patch of open ground between the guardhouse and the hangar door. It was a long time since he'd been here last, but he was still taken aback by all this security. The laws of departmental entropy dictated that there should be less security, not more, and that what security there still was should not work. Even in his day, the hangar had been protected from the attentions of intruders by a wooden gate kept shut by a bit of wire looped around the gate post, and a life-sized cardboard cutout of an Airedale silhouetted against the sky. Actual guards with rifles and steel helmets, he rubbed the side of his hand vigorously until his circulation started to move again, would have been out of the question. It all went to confirm his earlier impression that something was going on around here. He leaned back into the shadow of the door frame and, having checked to make sure the course was clear, he fished in his pocket for his penknife. Nail file? No. Corkscrew? No. Tweezers? No. Thing for taking stones out of impalas' hooves? Ah, here it was. Jemmy. He extracted the blade, inserted it between the door and the hasp of the padlock, and jerked hard. The blade broke. Astonished, Bjorn picked himself up off the ground and stared at the lock. Now, admittedly, you wouldn't normally rely on the metallurgical expertise of the Zambian state arsenals for anything much more strenuous than opening a letter, an airmail letter at that, but even so, this padlock was departmental property. In his experience, a gnat sneezing a mile away could leave it hanging from its shank like a hungover bat. His train of thought was derailed by a sound like the Milan rush hour played at full volume on Dolby stereo, and he instinctively ducked. This is serious, he said to himself, covering his ears with his hands. A burglar alarm. A burglar alarm that works, no less. Something was definitely going on around here. Bjorn burped disgustedly. He unslung his axe from behind his back, took 2 steps backwards, and let the padlock have it. "Ugh," said a voice behind him, followed by the sound of a man falling over. Bjorn looked over his shoulder to see a heavily armed trooper lying at his feet, with a dent in his steel helmet you could store linen in, and the head of Bjorn's axe lying on the ground beside him. The padlock, however, was still there. Bjorn frowned until his forehead resembled the knee of a pair of unfashionably wide-cord trousers. This wasn't the usual sort of departmental padlock, the sort that you get free at petrol stations if you stop off to halfway to the M34 and don't buy anything. This was a padlock.
Okay, chummy.
Bjorn could feel something cold and hard in the small of his back.
Spread 'em, and no funny business.
He sighed, turned around, picked the trooper up by his lapels, put him in a handily situated dustbin, and rammed the lid down hard. Some things, he was relieved to see, did not change. They may have snazzy new molybdenum steel padlocks, but the sort of men who end up working in security are still the ones who get chucked out of earthquakes because they can't quite make the grade, intellectually speaking.
Next time,
he said, not entirely unkindly,
you could try holding the rifle with the bit with the hole in it pointing away from you.
He gave the hangar door a final kick, yelped involuntarily, and trudged off into the darkness. "Down there!" Jane shouted above the roar of the engine and pointed. The pilot nodded uneasily.
"I still think,"
he shouted back. "Sorry?" "I said I still—" "What?" The pilot scowled. He knew she could hear him, and he was pretty sure she knew he knew, but for the life of him, he couldn't think of a way of proving she knew he knew she knew. He gave up and decided to just fly the plane instead. "There!" Jane was yelling in his ear. "Just by the big lake. Can you see? That's it. Go down lower." "It's not right," the pilot said to himself. "We'll get into trouble. I'll get into trouble. I really shouldn't be doing this." "Hold her steady!" Jane shouted. "I'm going to release the rockets now!" "It really is down to what's allowed and what isn't," continued the pilot's train of thought. "And as trains of thought go, this one is the Sundays only 0634 service from Llanelli, stopping at all stations to Neath, because if the pilot had enough brain to half fill the cap of the average biro, he'd still be cruising at 60,000 feet, with the intercom switched firmly off, and this has got to be something that isn't. He tried to communicate his anxiety to his passenger. "Are you sure you want me to—" "Sorry?" The pilot swore under his breath and pushed the joystick down. He was going to regret this. Crown Prince Constantine of Anhalt-Bernberg-Schwerin, enjoying a pleasant drink beside the pool, saw something rather odd reflected in the plush blue water. He sat up and looked skywards over the rim of his Porsche sunglasses. "Carl," he said. "Highness," the footman, impeccable as always in the full-dress uniform of the equerry, second class, with crossed mulberry leaves and bar, materialised behind him. The prince noticed that he was trying very hard, but in vain, not to giggle. "Carl," he went on, running a finger lightly over the sabre scar on his left cheek, "there is something in the sky that is not in the ordinary. Are you seeing it also?"
"Jawohl, Highness,"
replied the footman.
"I am seeing it also."
"Sehr gut," the prince replied. "You cannot be a prince of the blood and descended through 59 unbroken generations from Charlemagne without having enough sang-froid to keep champagne chilled in a firestorm." "For a moment I thought my eyes on me tricks were playing." He pushed the sunglasses back onto the bridge of his nose and said, "That will be all," and returned to his ski catalogue. The footman clicked his heels, retreated soundlessly behind a row of mulberry bushes, and collapsed into imperfectly muffled laughter, while overhead high-level winds started the long job of breaking up and dispersing an intricate pattern of vapour trails, which read, "Konstantin von Rossfleisch, you've had your chips." The heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes, also their births and marriages, their official engagements, the dates of their more important garden parties, and all the rest of the mind-numbingly interesting information that one finds under such bylines as Court Circular in the newspapers with the awkwardly big pages. Royalty are different from you and me. They don't panic. They don't run to and fro like headless chickens just because they get a warning from heaven telling them they're about to die. For example, the last thought that crossed the prince's mind, about a 75th of a second before the bomb concealed in the 4-foot-high inflatable rubber swan bobbing on the surface of the pool went off, was, how on earth did they manage to do the apostrophe in youth? In fact, Jane continued, I don't see why we can't do the same thing right across the board. The Dream Master General chewed a big lump out of his moustache and swallowed it. You don't, he said. No. Jane sat down uninvited on the edge of the desk and reached in her bag for her notebook. I've been giving it some thought, doing a few outline costings, that sort of thing, and really, very few people can say 3 dots, narrator's note, ellipses, and really mean them. But Jane could. The Dream Master General picked it. Narrator's note, it all involves an eyebrow. Trust me, it involves an eyebrow. The Dream Master General picked up a heavy rubber stamp reading fragile for use on the dreams of idealists, naturally, and started to peel the rubber bit off the wooden backing. For a start, Gian continued, this personal hand-delivering of everything, that's out. I mean, it's so inefficient, it's positively prehistoric. I mean, I gather you've got one guy who has to dress up in a red bathrobe once every year and deliver presents to every child in the known world. I mean, have you any idea what that costs you in overtime? You don't feel, said the Dream Master, in the tone of voice you'd expect from Volcano with indigestion, that it's an essential part of a truly personal service? No, another thing that's got to be sorted is the sorting. You've got to face up to the fact that we're dealing with here is messages, not premium bonds. Fair enough? So what? Croaked the Dream Master. Do you have in mind? Computerization, Jane replied promptly. And barcodes. It's very easy once you get the hang of it. I see. In the future, every boy's dreams are going to have little patterns of wiggly lines in the bottom right-hand corner, are they? You can disguise them as railings, Jane said, or stationary zebras, or something like that. All you need is a little imagination. You forgot to tell me, the Dream Master observed, how we're going to deliver the dreams without roundsmen. Did I? Jane smiled. By fax, of course. Direct, instantaneous transmission, brainwave to brainwave, and all during off-peak hours, too. It will be cheaper as well as quicker and more confidential. I see. The Dream Master leaned forward with the air of someone playing an ace. And what about prodigies? He demanded sharply. Sorry? Prodigies, the Dream Master repeated. The skies raining blood, spectral armies fighting in the clouds, plagues of frogs. Jane shook her head. They'll just have to go, she said. I mean, as information technology, frogs have had their day. So have plagues of, well, anything. She paused to examine a cracked fingernail, and then continued. You have got to meet the changing needs of the consumer. These days, if you get a plague of anything, people aren't going to go running to the nearest soothsayer. They'll be too busy organising emergency relief rock concerts. She made an expressive gesture with her hands. It all comes down, she said, to cost-effectiveness, time and motion, if you like. Time, as in the not wasting of. Motion, as in not wasting motion, as in not just going through. Really? Anyway, Jane said, standing up. It'll all be in my report. I expect you'll get your copy in due course. The Dream Master stood up too, and suddenly banged the desk in front of him. And just who do you think you are? He said. Easy. Jane gave him a long, hard look. I'm immortal. Or, if you would like to look at it another way, I'm one of the poor, bloody customers, the end users, the unfortunate souls who have to use the services all your blasted departments actually provide. The punters, in other words. The Dream Master grinned. Exactly, he said. Jane sat down again, put her head lightly on one side, and raised an inquisitive eyebrow. Narrator's note. See, there you go. Please go on, she said. Think about it, replied the Dream Master. You've got mortals. He picked up the stapler from his desktop, moved it 6 inches to the left, and put it down again firmly. And on the other hand, you've got us. He lifted his coffee mug and placed it carefully on top of a pile of petty cash vouchers. Understand? No.
Then I'll explain. Mortals have it easy. They're born, they lounge about for a few years, whinging, and then they die. We have to work here. Mortals, he pushed the stapler off the desk into the waste paper basket, but we're different. We are for keeps. He picked up the coffee mug, which a sheet of paper had fastened itself to the bottom of, and then he put it down again. You want to grasp the fact if you're going to work here. Another thing that's wrong with this department, Jane observed after a long pause, is the disgraceful waste of perfectly serviceable office equipment. She picked the stapler out of the bin, dusted it off and put it back on the desk. I take it you're not really sympathetic to my proposals. You could say that. Jane sighed. And you don't think that anybody else will be either? The Dream Master nodded. Let me give you a word of advice, he said. Try and get it into your head that improvements are not necessarily good. In fact, he added forcefully, usually quite the reverse. Remember that and you won't go far wrong. Thank you. I haven't finished yet. The Dream Master continued. Once upon a time, long ago, there was another bright spark just like you. Originally worked in this department, oddly enough. Thought everything around here needed a good shake-up. Reckoned we were all far too set in our ways, and a thorough pruning would do us all the world of good. Clear out the vested interests and the restrictive practices. Start from scratch. That sort of thing. He sighed. It all sounded so good that we tried it. Just for a while. Biggest mistake we ever made. Really? Oh, yes. The Dream Master lolled back in his chair and put his hands behind his head. The idea was to create a whole new level of staff to take over the running of the world. Look after it, repair it, make sure everything was kept clean and tidy and in good running order. And that's what we did. We recruited them, we trained them, and we handed over the whole shooting match. They were called, the Dream Master added, almost as an afterthought, the human race. Yes, snapped the Dream Master. Bloody silly idea, wasn't it? And you know what happened to the bright spark who suggested it? Feeling like the poor fool who's lent her watch to the conjurer, Jane shook her head. No, she said, do tell me. A grin like a septic dawn spread over the Dream Master's fears. He got posted, he said. Posted? The Dream Master picked up the fragile stamp, pressed it on an ink pad, and brought it down on the desktop so hard that it snapped in two. Yeah, he said, posted. Jane considered this for a moment. Wasn't that rather difficult? She inquired. No, replied the Dream Master. Once we'd got his head through the flap, the rest just sort of followed. Ooh. Dream Master's a bit of a mean sod, isn't he? He's a bit of a mean sod. Well, where are we going to go from here? Hopefully, I'm going to be recording these daily over the next week. I've got a lot of appointments, but I digress. Doesn't really matter. I don't know why I said I digress there, but either is yours. But yes, so even though I've got appointments sort of like in the mornings, then I'll be able to record in the afternoons, and then we'll kind of ease back into a better routine throughout January. Now, I've got to say, one of my favourite gifts, which is an absolute game changer if you're a narrator or if you do a lot of office work or anything like that. I never thought in all my days that I would like a cup warmer. Never thought it. But I've got one, and my crikey, I can go and pick up my cup of tea now, and it's still all nice and roast and toasty. Hold on. Perfect. You see, it really does help my voice as well. It's all nice and roasty toasty and warm as the minute I made it. I freaking love that thing. Thank you to the bear for giving me that amazing cup warmer. I'll probably get two more. Another one for the bedroom, another one for downstairs. They are fantastic. And your tea doesn't taste weird. I will literally spit bile and brimstone for anybody that thinks putting tea in a microwave, whether it's to heat it up, to make it, just if you don't make tea with a kettle, I don't want to know. Not a tea kettle, not a water boiler, water heater. It has to be a kettle, freshly boiled water. Pour it onto the tea bag, in the cup or in the pot, whichever you prefer. Let it brew, give it a bit of a stir to the colour that you want, add a bit of milk, there you go, let it sit for a minute, and then take the tea bag out. Bosh, cup of tea, nice.
mind, I drink tea with skimmed UHT milk, so it shows you how much I love my tea. So yes, I'm getting a new microphone filter, so hopefully the sound on this will be good. Because I have reorganized the studio, I'm reworking the sound engineering a little bit, engineering the sound structure. So hopefully this will sound all nice and lovely and wonderful, and that you enjoyed it and that you're having a good time with it. But please touch base, leave a comment or drop a line, or let me know how you're doing. It's New Year. We've got a lot to look forward to. I've got a lot to do, and I'm excited to share it with you because you're all awesome. Anyway, I'm going to send you lots of love, and thank you for your tolerance and your patience with me every time. I can't say how much I appreciate you. I really, really do. You're an amazing people, and I adore your souls. And if you've got any more suggestions for this year, what we can read and what we can do and all that sort of thing, by all means, please suggest away, because I love it. And we'll see how we get on, but it's going to be awesome. And as I said, don't forget, I'm going to be putting a bit more in my Substack again as well, because that's where it's at right now. And Blue Sky, I'm on Blue Sky too. I left the other one when it changed its name. So I am going to try and use them a bit more, and of course on all other social media channels, but mainly Instagram, to be perfectly honest. Anyway, I digress. I'm going to stop waffling on, and the most important thing is, if you're too hot, hydrate. If you're too cold, wrap up warm. Human burrito. Remember, if you're sad, give yourself a hug and appreciate yourself, because that's the way it goes. And always reach out if you need to, because that's what we're here for. And if we're not here, always try for a helpline or your healthcare provider, or just reach out, because you're not allowed to quit, as the great Jake Bauer will say. So my lovely beans, please take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you soon. Petal, take it easy.